Whenever you're ready.
Hi, my name is Daniel Benimovich, and I'll be arguing why invasive carp in the United States must be dealt with. So, in this presentation, I'll discuss what enables Asian carp to successfully thrive in American waterways, what are some ecological consequences of invasion carp, what are some economical consequences of Asian carp, and what are potential solutions we might be able to solve this problem. So, first, it's important to discuss how they came to America. So in the 1970s, Asian carp was introduced into America by aquaculture managers to control algae, snails, and other pests. However, during flooding events in the 1970s, they were released into the Mississippi River and were able to spread throughout the Mississippi River system since then. So it's important to discuss how Asian carp was able to adapt to the US waterways. So two big reasons why the Asian carp was able to adapt is that they have no natural predators and they are also capable of mass reproduction. So when Asian carp, or any invasive species for that matter, comes into a foreign environment, there are no predators that are able to or use them as a primary food source, while other local fish are already consumed as a primary food source. And coupled with the mass reproductive capabilities of Asian carp, they're able to produce millions of eggs at a time, and even though only hundreds or even tens of those eggs survive, they're still able to exponentially take control over an ecosystem. So another important thing to define and distinguish is the difference between evolution and phenotypic plasticity. And so evolution, according to Stanford, is the inheritance of heritable traits over a generation in a population, whereas phenotypic plasticity is the ability for one specific organism to demonstrate multiple different traits within and be capable of adapting to a new environment. And that's according to the National Institute of Health. So some examples of phenotypic plasticity which enable Asian carp to survive so well within this environment is its adaptation to food sources and its changing and spawning traits. So unlike local fish, Asian carp is capable of consuming both zooplankton and phytoplankton, and that is shown in the image on the left. Zooplankton is a larger type of microscopic organism. However, when they are consumed, local fish no longer have a resource to use as food. However, Asian carp uses zooplankton as food and phytoplankton when there is no more zooplankton left, which allows it to survive, whereas local fish cannot. Another reason why Asian carp are so successful is that they can change their spawning traits depending on the environment. And so, for example, if the temperature is cold or hot, they can find new locations to spawn in, as well as they prefer running, murky water to spawn, whereas most fish like still and safe water. So there are many ecological consequences to Asian carp, but some of the biggest one is the degradation of ecosystems. So Asian carp lower water quality, which kills off sensitive freshwater organisms such as mussels, and in turn, these mussels filter the water. And without the mussels, this creates conditions that are ideal for toxic algae blooms, killing many local species. In addition to killing the local species via toxic algae, the Asian carp result in a decrease of populations by expending resources which are no longer available to those species, such as zooplankton or phytoplankton, which they consume. And additionally to that, Asian carp also act as carriers to parasites and directly impact these local species. So in this quote by Asian Carp Canada, quote, Asian carps can alter habitat, compete with native fishes for food and habitat, and act as carriers for diseases or parasites that could spread to native fish. And this quote, I think, does very well in tying all my main points together and just demonstrating the extent of the Asian carp's capabilities to damage an ecosystem. So this image shows the distribution of Asian carp. The green right there, that shows bighead and silver carp, and the green, and these are the carp that mainly eat zooplankton and phytoplankton. The yellow shows the distribution of grass carp, which are the cause of toxic algae as they clean up mussels and other types of filters. And then spread out are the black carp, and the red is different spawning areas. And this just shows the extent of how far carp has already spread throughout the United States. So there are many economic consequences, but the two main industries which are affected by Asian carp are the fishing industry and boating industry. Now this poses a great risk since these two industries are also the prime industries in the Great Lakes. And the Great Lakes fishing industry is currently evaluated at nearly $7 billion annually. And that's according to the Great Lakes Fishing Commission. And this kind of shows a breakdown of different fish which are caught within the Great Lakes. And as can be seen, carp are nearly a fraction of the chart, whereas lake whitefish is mostly the fraction. And this is significant because if Asian carp were to start spawning within the Great Lakes, this would cause a decrease in the local populations, including lake whitefish and other bass, quillback perch, which are fished up and a big money maker for many fishers. This would result in devastating economic consequences, and it would be very difficult for fishers to create a living. Another industry that will be seriously affected is the $16 billion recreational boating industry. That is because silver carp are known to jump out of the water when they are startled. There are 4.1 million registered boats on the Great Lakes right now, and this is especially important because when there are so many boats running on the water, it's bound that some silver carp will get startled and jump out of the water, and this could actually hit a certain fisher or tourist, and this will prevent or disinterest tourists from going on these boating tours, severely hitting and impacting the recreational boating industry. And so I propose two solutions to this problem. The first is raising awareness and incentive to this problem, and the second is removing carp by force using technology. So the first solution is by incentivizing fishers via commission for catching Asian carp, and also increasing awareness via media. And this is good because not only Asian carp is not a very known problem right now, and it will spread awareness of the problem. Simultaneously, it will also stimulate the fishing industry by decreasing Asian carp populations, allowing for other local fish to thrive more easily. It also creates a supply of fish which are not really in demand, but creating a supply of fish will allow it to be donated or used as bait, and it could be utilized in other ways. And it also relieves some of the ecological stress from Asian carp. Some cons to this, however, is that it requires federal funding to compensate fishers, and it's not a permanent solution to this problem. And it's limited by government budgets and how much money they can distribute to fishers. Another solution I propose is removing Asian carp by force using technology. And what I mean by technology is electrical, chemical, or physical methods. And the pros to this is that it could be a potentially permanent solution. It could stimulate the fishing industry, and it can alleviate the risk which Asian carp pose to the Great Lakes. However, some cons to this: if it is improperly utilized, it might damage local wildlife. And there's a lot of limitations to this, as there are a lot of guidelines to consider, and it's very time-consuming, and it requires the cooperation of multiple state governments, so it might take a while for any long-term solutions to get passed. So the final solution I suggest is a combination of both a short-term and long-term solution. It will allow for temporary alleviation in many local ecosystems, as well as curbing the risk to the Great Lakes, and it allows for a long-term solution to be currently developed. And some cons to this is that until there's a permanent solution, Asian carp will always pose a risk and a threat to the Great Lakes economy and ecological landscape. And these are my sources.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so I have some questions for you.
Yep.
What information did you need before you began your research, and how did that information shape your research?
So some information I needed when I was looking for my research is what kind of methods have already been implemented in order to try to slow the Asian carp, invasion into the Great Lakes per se. And for those sources, I use many legislative sites such as the Congress.gov, and that's where they pass certain legislation to try to limit the response or to increase the response to the invasive carp. And this was important since I was able to see what has currently used, what has worked, what hasn't worked. And I guess, for example, one of the methods which has worked was there was an implementation of the electrical barrier within the Chicago Canal. And that has worked. However, there have been instances where carp have made it through the electrical barrier. And this is important because if a spawning carp were to get into the Great Lakes, this could pose, it takes only 10 spawning carp to fully take control over the Great Lakes, which just supposes that there needs to be a permanent and a solution which removes Asian carp from all of the United States.
Okay. And then lastly, explain the level of certainty you have about your conclusion, solution, or recommendation.
I feel I'm pretty confident and certain about my solution for two reasons. First of all, not only it offers a short-term solution which is fairly feasible and not limited by there are not many limitations or negatives to that solution. It is easy to do. It does not require a lot of budgeting other than compensation. And in turn, it will still provide economic revenue for both fishers and the government. And so there's a lot of balance to the first solution. And then the second solution, which was a more permanent solution, it's very passive. So it doesn't necessarily take action right away. Rather, it takes a more methodical and strategical approach, whereas it will first take time planning and then figuring out what works and what is safe, what adheres to guidelines. And a combination of both of these solutions would allow for Asian carp to first be relatively controlled, if not completely eliminated, but over time, once a permanent solution is discovered or implemented and researched, then it will be eliminated.
Okay, thank you very much.